Hey guys, this is Dawson Discussions, and I'm your host, Nathan L. Dawson Jr. In this video, I'm going to provide my opinion on Ice Cube's contract with Black America. So, stand by. So, what is the contract with Black America? So, the rapper, actor, and movie producer Ice Cube has been pushing a contract he developed with several experts in several fields, asking for politicians to back changes like banking, policing, and more that he believes that will have a direct and immediate and positive impact on the Black community in America. The contract of Black America is to, quote, strike at the heart of racism and present a blueprint to achieve racial economic justice, unquote. It was written in the backdrop of the killing of George Floyd, which set off a set of waves of protests not seen in the civil rights era of the 1950s and 60s, and a global health crisis in which the Black mortality rate is more than double than a white rate, in which 45% or nearly half a percent of Black-owned businesses are closed. Ice Cube was previously criticized for working with the Trump administration, but noted at the time that he plans to work with both sides of the aisle to push his agenda. In his contract with Black America, Ice Cube asked politicians for banking, police, and prison reform and elimination of commemorative statues, federal funding of baby bonds starting with $1,000 at birth, among other reforms such as reparations to support the Black community in order to earn the support of the Black vote. And this is my response to Ice Cube's contract with Black America, or the CWBA. In my opinion, I think Ice Cube's experts did a very exceptional job on drafting the contract with Black America. It's not perfect, but it is intended to strike at the heart of racism and presents a blueprint to achieve racial economic justice for the African American community. It contains 10 key points. Black opportunity and representation, massive bank and lending finance reform, judicial and public policy reform, a constitutional amendment, police reform, entertainment industry reform, and reparations, monuments and institutions, Black American responsibility, case for new construction economics, and a case for new construction education. Okay, starting off with number one, Black opportunity. Black opportunity talks about affirmative action, better government representation, better civil rights investigative body representation, changing local funding of schools like the other developed countries, how they fund their schools, and a few other things. Number two, massive bank lending and finance reform. It talks about reform bank lending and finance reform to have rates on Black loans federally and from the banks to be the same average as whites. Change the decades-old credit scoring model to mandate consideration of consumer data on rent, utility, and cell phone bill payments. A cookie jar company is any company that was knowingly involved in human trafficking, human bondage, slave trading, or slave labor at any points of its existence. Companies found to have been directly benefited from the private prison system, and those who perpetuated overt racist policies will be considered a cookie jar company. Individual negotiations will be conducted by a commissioner formed for the singular purpose of addressing penalties and remedies from these companies caught with their hands in a cookie jar. And number three, judicial and public policy reform is to ban all privately run prisons. Fines established to be paid by companies that profited of the private prison system. Lynching is to be a federal hate crime with a recommended federal sentence of life, and among other things. Number four, a constitutional amendment or reinforcement of the one of the constitutional amendments. Amendment will abolish slavery in any form, including as a punishment of crime as allowed by the 13th Amendment for prison inmates. Number five, police reform, which is a very extensive section, and I agree with most of that section. Once fired for cause cannot be rehired, chokeholds are to be illegal nationwide, mandatory dashboard and body cams, cam footage, body and dashboard to be released within a week for incidents resulting in death, serious injury, or that gives rise to charges of excessive force, and there's more to it, more to that section. Number six, the entertainment industry reform. I kind of half agree. Mandatory funding of Black studios by the largest Hollywood studios, record companies, and television studios and networks to compensate for the years of lack of support, stereotyping, and damage to the Black culture. Black studios will own and produce content by Black creators and will be run primarily by Black leadership. Content can be licensed to major studios. The reason why I disagree is I like the concept of a Black studios, but I just don't want Hollywood executives to fund it. It's better for it to be self-funded. The whole entire by blacks, written by blacks, produced by blacks, directed by blacks, who are not Boule at all. And for those who don't know, Boule, or the African American upper class, that represents 1% of the total black population in the United States of America. Some in the black community have been very critical of the Boule, or the black upper class community, primarily due to them believe that some of the members of the black upper class casually perpetuate many of the same divisive and discriminatory practices established by racist whites on people who share the same black heritage and marginalized history as they do. What is more, they have been critical of how some of them can brazenly be apathetic and insensitive to the black plight who still struggle with a generational poverty. Where I agree is the stereotyping and damage done to black culture and what Ice Cube is proposing. Racism still runs rampant throughout our society, and Hollywood is providing the instruction manual. Number 7, monuments and institutions. To me, it's all symbolic. Removal of Confederate statues, symbolic. The battle Confederate flag actually comes from the indigenous Americans and the Confederate Southern whites hijacked it and corrupted the true meaning behind it, which makes it a racial symbol to many Americans. Number 8, Black Americans' responsibility. Falsifying documentation to establish descent from an enslaved person is punishable as a crime. Black businesses who receive loans per lending reforms with over 100 employees will employ at least 50% non-black employees. As part of the 20% of diverted police budgets, community groups will be organized to work with troubled youth and will have a specific mandate to decrease black-on-black violent crime, other crimes, and address gang violence. Community groups will make themselves available in their neighborhoods to provide mentoring and community-based leadership, and among other things. Number 9, case for new Reconstruction economics. The Homestead Act of 1862, the Social Security Act of 1935, the GI Bill of 1944, and the Federal Housing Administration loans and its related redlining of the 1930s and 1960s. White Americans were granted advantage and opportunities that African Americans were not. All but 2% of the $120 billion of government-backed loans that were awarded were given to whites. So 98% were given to whites and only 2% were given to blacks or other ethnic groups. This reality undeniably helped create the incredible racial wealth gap between blacks and whites today. According to the Federal Reserve, the median white household has nearly 10 times the more wealth than a median black household does. A white person without a high school diploma has nearly as much wealth as a household led by a black person with a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree. A household led by a white person with a high school diploma has more wealth than a household led by a black person with a bachelor's or advanced degree, which is kind of shocking and a little bit disturbing at the same time. According to the real estate app Redfin, African American families have lost out on $212,000 in personal wealth over the last 40 years because their homes were redlined. Because of these historic wrongs, masses of African Americans need economic revitalization and relief, including through, but not limited to, more homeownership, less debt, better credit, and higher incomes. Another thing is to mandate descendants of African American veterans of World War II who were unable to capitalize on the opportunities afforded by the GI Bill of 1944 to 1956 to receive the benefits today calculated at 5% interest. After checking my genealogy or family tree, I used the census through Ancestry.com. My great-grandfather on my mom's maternal side, who was black, he was drafted into the Army during World War II in 1943, and he didn't get the opportunity to capitalize on opportunities afforded by the GI Bill because he was black, and he was a resident in Arkansas, which is a southern state. I pulled up his Department of Veteran Affairs, BIRLS, death file, 1850 to 2010, and I also pulled up his U.S. World War II draft class young men between the 1940s and, the 1940 to 1947. Also, mandate that all American corporations that benefit financially from slavery start a management trainee programs for African American college students, with the goal of being to increase the number of blacks in management and executive positions to one of equality with the black population, 13%, within a given number of years, and donate a federally managed percentage of their profits to black-owned businesses over a predetermined period of time. and to make a significant capital investment in financial infrastructure, as 70% of African American communities do not even have a branch or bank of any type and are subjected to predatory lending, and among other things. And the case for neo Reconstruction economics. And lastly, number 10, case for neo Reconstruction education. According to studies, there is a direct correlation between students' self awareness and exposure to positive imagery on television, like groups of their academic achievements. We should adopt this existing program into our school curriculum on a national level. Institute Spurs, which is a summer program for underrepresented students, initiative at major colleges and universities, primarily in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. Uh, Disciplines for underrepresented students from predominantly minority communities. Although most of the people in the United States are not aware of it, other advanced nations do not fund public schools with local property taxes. Instead, they provide equal per student funding and general tax revenues for all schools throughout the history. Some nations also provide extra funding for disadvantaged students. Okay, in conclusion, overall, Ice Cube experts did an exceptionally job on drafting the CWBA. It's not perfect, but it should actually is more of a step in the right direction. Also, I don't like the terms racial minority person, people of color, Black and Brown Coalition, marginalized groups, community of colors, BIPOC, which is Black Indigenous people of color, and etc. when talking about the Black plight. I am strictly concerned about the Native, non-Hispanic Black Americans who are descendants of slavery and Jim Crow discriminatory laws. So to me, I think those terms are code words, just like how the left wing say cut taxes and tough on crime are code words used by the right. Then person of color, people of color, that's also a code word used by the people on the left, which means undocumented and illegal immigrants and their children who arrive after the Immigration Naturalization Act of 1965 that was passed shortly after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Population of immigrants entering the country came increasingly from the countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America instead of Europe. Europeans, and I think especially Western Europeans, had a better process to enter the United States of America. The term minority is used interchangeably with people of color, but minority includes white women because women struggles in the U.S. Though women had their struggles, a white woman's struggle is not the same as a black woman's struggle in history, and white women benefits the most from the action, yet at the same time it's versus opponents. Marginalized groups neither mention gender or race. Religion and sexual orientation are usually targeted for being called marginalized groups. Religion, Jewish people through anti-Semitism, Arabs through Islam, and sexual orientation, the LGBTQIA plus community. It's a lot of letters for an acronym. It changes like very so often. Anyway, and also Black and Brown Coalition. Uh, it's Black people and Latino Hispanic people from the coalition. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, thinks that Latino and Hispanics are entitled to reparations, and that brown folk benefit more from a Black and Brown coalition than Black people do. So again, my primary political concern or my primary political interest is Black empowerment and Black racial justice, strictly for the non-Hispanic Black American who are descendants from slavery and or Jim Crow discriminatory laws. And by that I mean I'm actually talking about the native, those who are actually born in the United States, who are descended from slavery and Jim Crow, not necessarily the Nigerian who immigrates or the Ghanaian who immigrates or the South African who immigrates to the United States, or even the Caribbean nations like Haitians and Barbadians and even the Black Cubans, and also the Antiguas and the Grenadians. I strictly mean by Black people, I'm actually talking about the American descendants of Jim Crow and slavery, like that. But also at the same time, many opponents of the CWBA reparations or a pro-Black agenda will say either it's a cover for socialism, it's big government endorsed programs instead of letting laissez-faire free market capitalism handle it, or people who just straight up deny the racial wealth gap. But the Homestead Acts of 1862, the GI Bill of 1944, the Social Security Act of 1935, and the federal housing loans and its related redlinings are government programs that help create the American middle class that we know today and expanded the racial wealth gap between black Americans and white Americans. Black people were excluded from participating in those programs because of government mismanagement, like the Homestead Acts or the Jim Crow Acts. The Jim Crow laws, but they were only told to get a job and pick yourselves up by the bootstraps. And I'm going to explain these programs a little bit more in depth. So the Homestead Acts were several laws in the United States by which an applicant could acquire ownership of government land or the public domain, which was typically called a homestead. In all, more than 160 million acres of public land, 10% of the total land in the United States was given away free to 1.6 million homesteaders. Most of the homesteads were west of the Mississippi River. The 1866 explicitly included black Americans and encouraged them to participate, but rampant discrimination, systematic barriers, and bureaucratic inertia slowed black gains. Paul Freimer written a book about it, or at least he had a section in his book called Building an American Empire, the Era of Territory and Political Expansion. And also, historian Michael Lenza argued that while the 1866 law was not as beneficial as it might have been, it was part of the reason that by the year 1900, 1/4 of all Southern black farmers owned their own farms. And and speaking of farms, my ancestors, they also owned farms from 1910 to 1940. My great grandfather, he owned a farm in Arkansas, and also another ancestor also owned a farm, but it was only like brief for I think up to 10 years. Anyway, moving on. The Social Security Act of 1935 is a law created by the Social Security program as well as insurance against unemployment. The only problem was that it did not include domestic workers and farm workers. And my ancestors, they were farmers. My second great grandmother, as in my mother's mother named Josephine Love. She was a farmer per the 1940 census in Deja County, Arkansas. She probably didn't get Social Security benefits. And my second great grandfather, my mother's father's father, his name was Frank Shine. He was a farmer from 1910 to 1940. He also probably didn't get Social Security benefits. Again, I checked the census in order to see who in my family, if they did or if they did not own farms, and they did own farms. And you also have redlining. Redlining is a systematic denial of various services or goods by government agencies, local governments, or the private sector, either directly or through the selective raising of prices. The FHA policy to essentially instituted segregation for decades. If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that property shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. The FHA underwriting manual published in 1936. It stated a change in social or racial occupancy generally leads to instability and a reduction in values. The takeaway is that the FHA will not insure loans to black Americans attempting to buy homes in primarily white neighborhoods. White home ownership rate has been significantly higher than other races for decades. From 1940 to 1970, the rate of white home ownership has climbed from 45.7% to 65.2%, and then inched up to 68.2% in 1990 per the Census Bureau. Black home ownership rate also increased over the decades, only at lower levels, from 22.8% in the 1940s to 41.6% in the 1970s, upward to around 43 to 44% in the 80s and the 90s. Home ownership rates for African Americans have leveled off and sometimes even dropped since the 1990s. Census data says that the home ownership rate from 2016 to early 2020 ranged from 41% to 44% for all black Americans, compared to the range of 71 to 74% for non-Hispanic white Americans. An ACLU study shows that black homeowners suffer more greatly during the housing bust, where white homeowners saw their equity drop only 9.1% from 2007 to 2009 and another 2.2% from 2009 to 2011. Black homeowners' equity decreased 11.9% and 5.6% respectively. This difference likely emerged from a result of blacks' disproportionate exposure to predatory loans and other deceptive mortgage schemes, the study authors wrote. And also, the Servicemen Readjustment Act of 1944, commonly known as the GI Bill, was a law that provided a range of benefits for returning World War II veterans, commonly known to as the GI. The original GI Bill expired in 1956, but the term GI Bill is still used to refer to programs to assist U.S. military veterans that were honorably discharged. African American veterans benefited less from the GI Bill than white Americans. Additionally, banks and mortgages agencies refused to loan to blacks, making the GI Bill even less effective for blacks. Once they returned from the war, blacks faced discrimination and poverty, which represented a barrier to harnessing the mortgage and educational benefits of the GI Bill, because labor and income were immediately needed at home. Most Southern university principals refused to admit blacks until the civil rights movement. Segregation was legally mandated in that region. Colleges accepting blacks in the South initially numbered 100. Those institutions were of lower quality, with 20 of them classified as sub-baccalaureate. Only 7 states offer a post-baccalaureate training, with no accredited engineering or doctoral programs were available for blacks. These institutions were all smaller than whites or non-segregated universities, often faced a lack of resources. By 1946, only 1/5 of the 100,000 blacks who had applied for educational benefits had been registered in college. Furthermore, HBCUs, the historically black colleges and universities, came under increased pressure as rising enrollments and trained resources forced them to turn away an estimated 20,000 veterans. HBCUs were already the poorest colleges. HBCU resources were stretched even thinner when veterans' demands necessitated an expansion in the curriculum beyond the traditional preach and teach course of study. Though blacks encountered many obstacles in the pursuit of GI benefits, the bill did greatly expand the population of African Americans attending college and graduate school. In 1940, enrollment at black colleges was 1.08% of the total U.S. enrollment. By 1950, it had increased to 3.6%. However, these gains were limited almost exclusively to northern states, and the economic and the educational gap between whites and black nationally widened under the effects of the GI Bill. With 79% of black population living in the southern states, educational gains were limited to a small part of black America. So again, going back to my second great grandfather, or my mom's father, Houston Shine, he drafted into the military April 29th, 1948 at the age of 23. Again, U.S. World War II draft course young men, 1940 to 1947. Check that section. And also check the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, BIRLS death file, 1850 to 2010. And my great-grandfather was not awarded the GI Bill. If he was, he probably would have used it for a rental property, and real estate is known to build massive wealth. And that wealth would have trickled down to my grandmother, my mother, and myself. Also, President Trump signed an executive order for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders economic empowerment back in May 2019. It's called Executive Order 13872. For the purposes of this order, the term Asian American includes persons with the jurisdiction of the United States having origins or ancestry in any of the original peoples of East Asia, which would be China, Japan, Mongolia, North Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. Southeast Asia, South Asia, India, and Southeast Asia being Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And the term Pacific Islander includes people of Hawaii, Guam, America Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, or Pacific Islands. So, Section 1, the AAPI population is the most rapidly growing ethnic groups in the country and is expected to increase to 40 million individuals by 2060. At that time, people of AAPI descent are projected to be more than 9% of the nation's population. And also, I don't remember conservatives, like whether politicians or news pundits or the voter base, going after Trump for signing an executive order because socialism, big government, not letting laissez-faire free market capitalism handle it for the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So President Trump signed an executive order for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for their economic empowerment back in May 2019. Again, Executive Order 13872. And white Americans took advantage of the Homestead Acts of 1862, the GI Bill of 1944, the Social Security Act of 1935, the Federal Housing Administration loan that is related to redlightings, but black people are only told to get a job and pick themselves up by the bootstraps. So the Brookings Institute wrote an article in October 2019 saying that the black household income is rising across the United States. Household income being the combined gross income of all household members who are 15 years or older. Gross income for an individual, also known as the gross pay when it's on a paycheck, is an individual's total pay from his or her employers before taxes and other deductions. Most income black people receive is usually earned income, which is the most taxed and time and physical energy intensive to obtain, versus portfolio income from dividends, interest, capital gains, and passive income from landlording by collecting rent and business profits. Not to mention that we have automation and artificial intelligence, algorithms, robotics, mechanization, and machine learning disrupting African American workers who have higher rates of job displacement than the general U.S. population due to, again, the automation, according to a new report by the consultancy McKinsey by the year 2030. Essentially, I'm not against black people getting a job, but saying to get a job and pick yourselves up by the bootstraps, it's got to be the worst thing to say to a community that is trying to build wealth. That works for income, yes, but not wealth. Income and wealth are not the same thing. Income is more like a river that that can easily dry up and it flows in a general direction, as in paycheck from a job. But if you're laid off or too sick or too injured to work, then the cash flow stops. But wealth is like a lake that is stored and can be tapped into at will without really drying up because it grows much faster than income. The issue is wealth, as in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate, businesses, commodities like gold and silver, not a large salary like income. My primary political concern is black empowerment for the Native, non-Hispanic black Americans who are descendants from slavery and or Jim Crow discriminatory laws. Again, I don't like the term racial minority, people, person of color, black and brown coalition, marginalized group, communities of color, BIPOC, which is black, indigenous people of color, etc., because those terms do not mean black descendants of slavery and or Jim Crow. So if there's a federal candidate out there, or state candidate, or a city candidate, Democrat or Republican, or whatever political party that they are, whether Libertarian, Constitutional, Green, or even if they're a strong, polling independent candidate, if they don't have a black agenda, like a black economic empowerment plan, then you're not going to get a vote from me, period. And of course, you're probably not going to get a vote from a good number of blacks too. Can't say all blacks, because again, all blacks did vote for Biden, and also some blacks also voted for Trump, but you're not going to get a vote from me, period. And other blacks who also agree with the CWBA, and then also tired of the Democrats and Republicans. So currently we're in the 2020s. By 2030s, the African American workers will have the highest rates of job displacements, losing their jobs to automation, AI, algorithms, machine learning, and increased mechanization. By the 2040s, the U.S. will become minority white. In 2045, that the census projects. The white share of the U.S. population has been dropping from a little under 90% in the 1950s to 60% in 2018. By 2050s, the median black household wealth has gone to $0.00. By 2060s, me personally, I'll be set to retire, and I should be eligible to draw Social Security if it's still around. In 2065, whites would be 46% of the U.S. population, and Hispanics would be 24% of the population. Asians would be 42%, and as usual, blacks would be 13%, which is the lowest number in the population. And by in between 2040 and onwards. There's going to be a whole lot of lawsuits and political battles between blacks versus Hispanics, blacks versus Asians, blacks versus whites. Like, for example, Washington voters narrowly rejected affirmative action in referendum 88 in 2019. But throughout the campaign, opponents of affirmative action, led by a group of Chinese immigrants, said a policy gives the government the power to discriminate. Another example is Oregon. They earmarked $62 million explicitly to benefit black individuals and business owners. Now, some of the money is going to be in limbo after lawsuits of alleging racial discriminations. But now, millions of dollars in grants are on hold after one Mexican American and two white business owners sued the state, arguing that the fund for black residents discriminated against them. But Black and Brown Coalition, right? When one Mexican American sued because discrimination, yet black people are told to join that Black and Brown Coalition. Black being, black people like myself, and brown being Mexican Americans. So as I said before, I don't think black Americans, those who are descendants of slavery and Jim Crow discrimination, those who are not immigrants from a foreign country will be a socially economic viable people by the 22nd century or the year 2100 or 2100. So essentially, what I recommend is for us to get into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics for real employment. Also to, excuse me. So also to, get into like architecture. Like computer programming, computer hardware engineering, being doctors, pharmacists, forensic scientists, labs, like STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Also to practice group economics. Just like Dr. Clyde Anderson wrote in his book, Powernomics, National Plan to Empower Black America. He said it best called ethno-aggregation, which is best defined as the voluntary concentration of individuals and their resources around their ethnic and language commonalities for the purpose of improving their economic and political competitiveness. So the culture of these groups emphasizes that members rally around common characteristics or attributes, ethno, in order to pool their resources, which is the aggregation, and compete with non-group members. So, we see this with, the Chinatowns, Koreatowns, Little Italy, Little India, the Arabic neighborhoods in Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, and historically for us, the historic Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the most famous Black Wall Street, Jackson Ward, Richmond, Virginia, and Paris Street, Durham, North Carolina, and other Black Wall Streets. So it also was said that the national buying power of blacks in 2019 was 1.4 trillion, according to a study by Selig Center for Economic Growth. According to Dr. Amarenda Dehidraj, in her piece called World's 15 Cities in 2017, New York, London, and Tokyo, CEO World Magazine said that the wealth of LA in 2017 was like, trillions of dollars. However, this number has nothing to do with wealth within the community, since that money was already accounted for and spent. But by that definition, buying power consists of exchange goods and services and the needs within our communities. The black dollar circulates about 6 hours. The white dollar circulates 17 days, 20 days for the Jews, and 1 month for Asians. Buying black, as in black people buying from black-owned businesses, is one of the simplest ways to continue that circulation. Yet it can be a struggle to live completely black in a society post-segregation. And of course, one of the known fiercest opponents of segregation was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But Harry Belafonte, who's an actor and activist alongside MLK, shared a moment saying that midway through the civil rights movement, Dr. King realized that the struggle for integration would ultimately become a struggle for economic rights. Then Belafonte reflected, I remember about the last time that we were together at my house, shortly before he was murdered. He seemed quite agitated and preoccupied, and I asked him what was the problem. Belafonte said that King responded, I've come to something that disturbs me deeply. We have fought hard and long for integration, as I believe we should have, and I know we will win, but I've come to believe that we're integrated into a burning house. I'm afraid that America has lost the moral vision she may have had, and I'm afraid that even as we integrate, we're walking into a place that does not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and disenfranchised. Until we commit ourselves to ensuring that the underclass is Given justice and opportunity, we will continue to perpetuate the anger and violence that tears of the soul of this nation. I fear I am integrating my people into a burning house. So essentially, I think the 1950s and the 1960s civil rights movement should have stopped at equal protection under the law. But unfortunately, integration was pushed, and then now look at black people where they stand from an economic standpoint today, like the wealth and the finances. We don't practice ethno aggregation like the Jewish, Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, and other immigrants groups because we are mostly integrated. But essentially, segregation is the arbitrary separation of people on the basis of their race or something inappropriate characteristic. So essentially, Jim Crow was segregation laws. Desegregation and integration, though they kind of go hand in hand, it's not necessarily the same thing. Desegregation is just the opposite of segregation. Instead, desegregation would legally give blacks the option of staying with a black environment, but they will have the opportunity to integrate if they wanted to. But integration would be the mixing of races and ideally the ignoring of any racial distinctions, social cultural battle with numerous questions. What should we do? What does everybody want to do? Do we need to force it if it is happening on its own? Or like that. So that would be integration. In my opinion, the civil rights movement should have stopped at equal protection under the law. Because to me, I more prefer ethno aggregation, again, promoted by Dr. Anderson's book, Powernomics, The National Plan to Empower Black America. That was written in the early 2000s, I think 2000 or 2001. So, yeah, again, with Powernomics, Dr. Claude Anderson says, practice ethno aggregation, like have blacks, buy black, spend black, have the dollar continually circulate in the community. And then once we have that, then we'll take some of our money and then, move up to the next floor, which is politics. As I start up some political action committees and by politicians, just like these super PACs do. I mean, Israel, they have APAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, and then you have like all these super PACs do, but the Black American don't even have a political action committee. And then when we have our politicians in place, then we implant our Black agenda onto them, and then we'll go to the next one, which is third floor, which is courts, as in have our politicians then fix the justice system, reverse the 1994 crime bill, the Violent Crime and Control Law Enforcement Act of 1994, and then end the war on drugs, and then end police brutality. And then when we have that, then we move up to education, start up our own schools, and then lastly the last four, which is media, control our media and then control our narrative, just like how I'm doing right now. Like this here is, a black-owned media outlet. Of course, I'm not popular like all others, but this is actually a black media because I myself, I'm black, and I'm actually sharing news and sharing my commentary on things like that. So yeah, that's actually my commentary on Ice Cube's contract with Black America. And this is also my commentary on, black politics and black issues. Again, my name is Nathan L. Dawson Jr. This is Dawson Discussions, and I will see you in the next video. All right, take care.